The clock on the wall of the dilapidated metro station ticked with a lethargic rhythm, as if mocking the very essence of time itself. It was close to midnight, and the city had fallen silent, muffled by a thick fog that wrapped around the buildings like a shroud. The air was crisp, carrying an eerie chill that raised goosebumps on Hannah's arms as she waited for the next train. She stood alone on the platform, her breath visible in the dim light, forming ghostly clouds that dissipated into the mist around her. The faint glow from the overhead fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting elongated shadows that danced along the tiled walls, creating a grotesque display that played tricks on her mind. Panic clawed at her throat as she glanced over her shoulder, half expecting a figure to emerge from the swirling white. Just moments earlier, she had hurried from her office, eager to catch the last train before the city succumbed completely to the encroaching darkness. The fog had rolled in quickly, transforming the familiar streets into a labyrinth of eerie silence and shadow. Now, as the minutes dragged by and her phone showed no sign of a train, the oppressive mist seemed to seep deeper into her bones, filling her with an unsettling sense of dread. Hannah sighed, glancing at the dimly lit overhead sign. It flickered an ominous delayed while the tick of the clock continued its mocking chorus. She pulled her coat tighter around her, the fabric doing little to ward off the biting cold. The deafening silence began to weigh on her, and with it, an otherworldly sensation began to rise from the depths of the fog. She strained her ears, thinking she heard something a whisper, carried past her like a ghostly refrain. Another flicker drew her attention, and she focused on the tracks ahead, feeling the familiar, nervous energy that accompanied waiting. She had taken this route hundreds of times. The metro was one of the few things she deemed trustworthy in this chaotic city. But as she stood there, enveloped by the unnatural fog, the memories of countless late-night rides, filled with laughter and kindness, faded like distant echoes. A sound broke the silence, a shuffling noise that came from the tunnel leading deeper into the station. Hannah's gut twisted with apprehension as she turned towards the shadows. "Is anyone there?" she called, her voice trembling slightly, swallowed by the fog. No answer came, only a rise in the ambient noise, a whisper that seemed to crawl through the shadows. "Come play with us," a voice cooed softly, barely above a whisper, as if carried by an unseen child. She blinked hard, half expecting to see a small figure darting around the corner. "Hello? Who's there?" This time her voice was stronger, demanding in its urgency. But all that followed was the ominous sound of her heart pounding against her ribs. Without warning, the lights flickered violently, illuminating the platform in sporadic flashes. In those brief intervals, she saw silhouettes, vague figures shuffling back and forth, their movements jerky and unnatural. Panic gripped her as the fog thickened, swallowing the scene around her. Dread seeped into her bones as the voices continued, eerily hushed yet unmistakably present. "Hannah." The voice, distorted and layered with a female timbre, flowed through the air, drawing her attention like a moth to a flame. She fought the urge to approach the source, understanding inherently that whatever waited in the heart of the fog, it was no innocent voice. She stepped back, her heart racing faster, and wrestled with her instincts. Should she flee or confront this inexplicable presence? Before she could decide, a low rumble echoed through the station, the very air thickening with malevolent energy. The fog swirled violently at her feet, and shadows stretched, coming alive with a hunger she could almost feel. Suddenly, a thunderous blast of wind swept through the station, chilling her to the bone, causing her to stumble backward. The whispers crescendoed into a maddening chorus, all distinct voices swirling in a chaotic dance, enveloping her in their chilling embrace-lost souls, trapped in time, suspended and waiting for her. The shadows flickered closer, their forms becoming more recognizable: a train conductor, a businesswoman in an old-fashioned dress, a group of children grasping each other's hands. "Join us," they beckoned softly, reaching out with translucent fingers, their eyes void of life, yet glimmering with a desperate longing. Each figure bore the mark of someone lost within the fog, their expressions pleading and haunting. Hannah could feel the cold emanating from them, a chilling reminder of what awaited those who accepted their invitation. "No," she shouted, her voice stronger now, grounding her in the reality of her predicament. Empowered by defiance, she whipped around, ready to run, but the air was thicker than before, almost like a veil that wrapped around her limbs, holding her still, She could feel their presence closing in, entwining her in a web of dread. Suddenly, the lights returned to full intensity, a brilliant white that illuminated every corner of the platform. The silhouettes recoiled, their haunting whispers stifled in the blinding light. In that moment of clarity, Hannah saw them for what they were, echoes of lives interrupted, souls begging for someone to acknowledge them. And she realized that fleeing wouldn't shake them. They were a part of her now, awaiting the opportunity to claim her if she faltered. From the depths of the tunnel, she discerned the rumbling sounds of an approaching train. It was only a fleeting heartbeat away, and the shadowy figures shrank back into the depths, trailing off with their mournful whispers. Hannah seized the moment, her heart pounding with urgency as the headlights of the train illuminated the tunnel, growing closer and overpowering the fog. With adrenaline surging through her veins, she dashed towards the train's open doors. She threw herself inside just as the doors slid shut with a definitive mechanical hiss, the familiar smell of metal and grease washing over her, momentarily easing the terror. As she settled into her seat, she glanced back at the platform, her breath catching in her throat. The fog began to thin, but behind it, she caught glimpses of the figures now drawn back into the shadows, yet watching, waiting. The train jolted forward, its momentum propelling her away from the grim echoes that haunted the station. The whispers dulled, fading into the distance, but she knew they still lingered. No matter how far she managed to escape that night, Hannah understood deep down that she had crossed paths with the forgotten souls. Though the train pressed onward, she couldn't shake the feeling that their whispers would haunt her, a reminder of the thin veil between life and the unyielding grasp of the afterlife, a tether forever anchored in her memory, ready to tug at her soul when the fog returned.